Thank you for joining us for today's Learn webinar, Space Matters, How Design Impacts Learning. I want to introduce our esteemed panel today. First, we are joined by Gray Young, who is superintendent of Fort Mill Schools. Gray is a product of the district and now leads and has spent more than 2 decades in service to students in Fort Mill as a teacher, as a principal, and now as a superintendent. And he has worked during that time to focus on building strong school culture and supporting student services, leading through growth and change in a very rapidly expanding district. Dr. April Mussian is a full professor at Winthrop University, where she prepares future educators. Her research centers on equity and access for marginalized youth. Dr. Sue Ann Hyland brings both a researcher and a practitioner lens to our conversation today. She works with schools across the country on learning environment design and is the author of a new book titled Reimagining Learning Spaces, where she explores how intentional design can transform teaching and learning experiences. And finally, we're joined by Learn board member Cindy Goss, who brings a critical industry and implementation perspective, working closely with schools to translate design ideas into real functional learning environments that actually work for teachers and students. So thank you for joining us today as we talk about how space matters in K through 12. So I'm going to just kick us off with a really broad question. And I'll throw this out to anybody who wants to jump in. You don't have to raise your hand. But my first question is, when you think about a space that truly supports learning, either as a student, as an educator, as a school leader, as a parent, what makes that work? What made that space work, if you can picture one in particular? And anybody who wants to jump in.
I can start. I think when I'm thinking about especially our newer schools, we've really shifted from a kind of a long corridor of classrooms, individual classrooms on each side, to more of a collaborative kind of space of classrooms, I guess, kind of like a neighborhood almost, of classes. And outside of those classes are the collaborative spaces where students are able to really work together and work together and problem solve and do things like that. And I think that's so important, especially in this day and age. I mean, we're teaching kids a lot more than just curriculum, or math, English, whatever it is. We really need to teach them how to be collaborative, how to communicate with each other, especially in the day and age of cell phones, because when they get home, they're usually looking at a tablet or looking at a TV or doing something like that. So we're so responsible in school buildings for teaching them so much more than just the academic part. We've really got to teach them about the social part. And that's kind of the culture that we live in. So I feel like those collaborative spaces are so much different than when I grew up. We had collaborative spaces. You think about the library. A library used to be just bookshelves of books and not many windows necessarily. All of our learning commons, or we call them learning commons, or media spaces are natural lighting, not many overhead fluorescent lights like Cindy was talking about earlier. You don't have the buzzing of the fluorescent lighting. It's really a lot of natural light. And I think that just creates a space where kids are comfortable. They feel like they can learn. They feel like they can collaborate. A lot of collaborative spaces within our media centers now as well. So I think the biggest shift I've seen and the biggest learning impact is those collaborative spaces outside of our classrooms, within our buildings, and especially within our learning commons or our media centers.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
Anybody else want to jump in? Something that makes a, a space that truly supports learning. What does that look like? What makes that work?
I will definitely second what Gray said. And to add to that, I think making sure that those spaces are really fluid for what might happen in the future. We say that the spaces need to be future ready because we don't know what we're teaching in 5 years, in 10 years. So, a good friend of mine, Dr. Lenny Scott Weber, says that you've got fixed, you've got that fluid on the other end, and then you've got the flexible in the middle, and you've got to have little pieces and parts of each in order to make that environment really support what students learn.
I love that. Thank you. Cindy, did you want to add anything to that? It could be what makes it work or how a physical space influences learning outcomes.
I was just going to say, I agree with both what Gray and Dr. Hyland said. I was just going to add that I think a space for learning has to feel welcoming. And I think that we need to dive into further, like what does welcoming feel like for a student, because that's different for the elementary student versus the middle school versus the high school, versus the college student. So what makes it feel welcoming? Is it the way that the natural light comes in, to Gray's point? Is it the way that it does have those collaboration spaces where they can kind of decompress away from a desk? So I think there's a lot. I think that's what a lot of us are passionate about, is to solve for what is that built environment. What can we control that makes them come in and feel welcome and then open to learn?
Yeah, good. Good, thank you. And then Dr. Mustian, I was going to shift to you and thinking about kind of research, because I know you do both research and educator training, right? And so in thinking about kind of the relationship between design and learning outcomes, what is the research saying there, or what do you think is maybe often misunderstood?
The research is really saying that balance is important and intentionality, functionality is really important when you're thinking about intentional design decision making and its positive impacts on student learning. We are in an age of technology and really cute, fun classroom design spaces that are based on aesthetics, and that's great, but it oftentimes it lacks the purpose, the intention, the you know the am I maximizing organization for myself as a teacher? Am I maximizing a welcoming environment, just like Cindy said? Am I ensuring that, like Gray said, the ability, am I creating a space where collaboration and all those, soft but such critical skills are maximally able to be produced? And where the research is showing we fall short as educators is we are often choosing aesthetics first, and intentionality and functionality is often an afterthought. And so things cannot be sustained. We don't see as much of an impact because we are looking mostly at, does it look really good? And I think we can, everyone in this space can argue you can have both. There's a balance, right? So
That culture of come decorate your classroom before the school year, right? It's really about decorating, and that's not what this is about.
right.
Intentionally designing a learning
Mm-hmm.
environment. Good. Dr. Hyland, can is there maybe one finding that you could share that maybe changed how you think about school design, or something that really surprised you in the research, or would be surprising to superintendents that we work with?
Absolutely. There is a great study that came out in 2021 that really talked, we've all heard that research about, well, the environment can improve, plus or minus 25%, and it's got to be the third teacher. We've heard that, but we didn't really understand the true impact. And in 2021, there was a study that came out that said, and I'm just going to read this because it's just such a beautiful quote. When designed and used effectively, Flexible learning spaces provide learning environments where students can experience increased autonomy to make a variety of choices about their learning in a way that fosters self-regulation, collaboration, and interaction while ensuring their well-being. And I think that really hit me because as educators, I think we know instinctively that our environment makes a difference. When I was in the classroom, I wanted to make the environment feel like it was that third grade one-room schoolhouse, or I wanted it to feel like it was this jungle, that my kids could study while we were doing science. But I didn't realize it would make that vast of an impact. And I
Mhm.
think we really saw that happen when we took the environment away from our kids during COVID. And now that we're back, we're going, wow, it really does make such a huge difference. So I think that one probably is the biggest study that I went, yes, it really does make that big of a difference.
That's a good one. Yeah. And I was gonna actually bounce this also to Cindy and say, I know a lot of the research that you've been reading has to do with kind of the auditory environment. I know Dr. Mussian is interested in that as well, and we were talking about it some before the start of the webinar. Is there anything that has kind of jumped out to you as kind of changing how you think about the auditory environment for kids?
I think to Dr. Highland's point that COVID and the shift that we all went through in the world, right? But specifically the shift in education taught us so much. It taught us about, being ready for these type of crises as they present themselves, but it also taught us a lot about the way that students learn. And I feel like it took something that we've all talked about and wanting to change for 100 years plus, like the typical classroom of the future. And we had to realize really quick that that classroom of the future is now. Like we're there.
Mhm.
We're there. And one of the biggest shifts that we've seen, not only from post COVID, but also from a safety standpoint, is the use of equipment in the classroom to help alert if we need to have a safety concern. It's an alert system, but it also works as a way to project an instructor's voice, which is very helpful because you don't want students, sitting in the back row. You don't want them missing. There's some research out there that talks about students miss 1 out of every 5 words in a situation where the acoustics aren't balanced in a classroom. And so we've taken the step to have a way to be able to project the voice of an instructor so that every student can hear, and that is an equitable experience for everyone. But what we need to do is take it almost a step beyond that and find out how can we balance that out with the student's health and the way they're absorbing that instruction, right? Like, is it coming at them in a way that at the end of the day they feel like they've been yelled at for the entire school day, and now they need that time to decompress because it's coming across a little too loud, or the acoustics in the space isn't right for the messaging to be clear enough because you immediately feel like you're being yelled at. So there's a lot to study there, and I think we're just getting started in that process.
Jeannie, can I add something to that?
Please. Yep. I was
Um,
coming to you. Yep.
Yep, sorry.
No, do it.
Yeah,
Jump in.
Cindy said something that made me think, talking about the flexible learning spaces and
Mhm.
the acoustics and how, students in the back of the classroom, I've walked in classrooms where they do have this flexible learning space, and you can't tell what the front or the back of the classroom is really. And I think that's really magical, honestly, because the teacher's moving all the way around the classroom, in the middle of the classroom, and so forth. I do think that we have to, as superintendents and as principals, we really have to invest in professional development for these teachers when we're giving them the space. We can't just give them the space and say, hey, here's your space, make magic happen. This is it. I think we have to teach them how to use the space if we're going to give them a flexible learning space. So I just wanted to add that in there.
I'm so glad you said that. I actually it was right here in my notes to ask you about because that was my next question. Like, how do teachers typically respond to
Yeah.
redesign spaces, and then what support do you think that they need to adapt? I think that I've had the pleasure of walking around in the schools that your district leads, and you guys are really on the cutting edge with excellent kind of natural light and in spaces and flexible seating and
Yeah.
desks that piece together in really interesting ways. And I mean, it's very clear that you have taken design very seriously in the district. Um, and we do know that even if you design a beautiful space, it doesn't always get off the ground, or it isn't always used or utilized.
Yeah.
And so what do you think teachers need to get it to cross that bridge?
Yeah, I think it starts with the design process itself. I think you have to have the teachers involved in that design process,
Right.
and even students if you can. I know with Catawba Ridge, which is our newest high school, it's 7 years old now, hard to believe, but and that's where your husband works, Jeannie. But so it is, I think we had students involved in that design process to kind of, hey, what do you think about this space? How would you use this space? But especially teachers, you have to have them involved in the design process. And then once you get the space up and ready, I think you have to look at the teachers and say, how are you planning to use this process? And then give them ways that they can use the space to basically give the kids what they need, give the kids the resources they need, and how is the teacher going to use that space? So I think that's so important to have them involved from the get-go at the design space. And we've done a good job with our schools when we built them. And I can't take credit for this. I was just working here then, but I did open a school. I opened Pleasantville Middle School, and when we opened it, we were all involved in the design process. From the principal, we had teachers, especially our related arts teachers, the art room, the media center, and then just the normal classroom. How would you set the furniture up? We got special desks that could go into, groups of 2, 3, 4, 5. They were designed that way. So I think it's so important for all stakeholders to be involved from the start to the finish of it, and then providing those teachers with that professional development to how to use a flexible learning space is really important.
Yeah, when I first saw those desks that piece together at Catawba
Yeah.
Ridge, I was teaching at a university level and got so excited. I was like, I could do so many cool
Yeah.
activities in this classroom if I had this space.
Yeah.
But one of the things I really like about, since you mentioned Catawba Ridge, is that you didn't forget about the teachers either. There's even peace rooms in there I don't know if that's what you call them, but
Yeah.
that's what I
Yeah.
call them, in there for the teachers to kind of collect and
Yeah.
recover in between. Do you want to mention anything about that? I don't know if you.
Yeah, those are awesome. I actually, I saw the one that they actually just did this summer. They went in and painted it and had the teachers come in and kind of give input. And just an awesome room. I went in there. I wanted to take a little nap for a while, but maybe I'll go hide there sometime. But no, I think that's so important. We've got to take care of not only our students, but we've got to take care of our teachers and give them spaces as well to be able to kind of wind down or plan or collaborate with other teachers. I think that's so important to take care of them as well.
Absolutely. Dr. Mustian, I was gonna come to you if you're ready. I know that a lot of your research has to do with access and belonging,
Yes.
particularly for exceptional populations. And so, would you like to speak to how design matters for those students in particular?
Absolutely. I could talk about this for a really long time, so you just cut me off when I've said enough. Just to add to what Gray has shared, I think it's so critical to um, from the very outset have someone who is well versed in just access around disability, not just your physical disabilities, but even hidden disabilities. We're already kind of talking about, the acoustics in a room, which is really important when we're trying to support any student who has like an auditory processing disorder. And I live for the day, and I don't think we've arrived, but I think we're definitely moving towards that, where when we think about learning spaces and the design of them, that we are so proactive when it comes to thinking about access from an ability standpoint that, we already have the spaces where, if a student who's a wheelchair user or a student who gets acutely injured and suddenly needs to use a wheelchair, you already have a room that is adaptable and flexible enough to support that mobility challenge. And I will also say, you know, I am doing some work right now that's around the number of school age kids who are dealing with at least one chronic illness. And that number, friends, post pandemic is beyond your wildest beliefs. But we're looking at upwards of 76% of school age children right now, as of December 2025, have at least one chronic illness. And so when we talk about flexible learning spaces, we even need to think about, increasing teachers' capacity to support the kids who are frequently hospitalized, who are coming in and out of the classroom dealing with brain fog because of, maybe chemo treatments or some other really critical medical treatment. What kind of space is going to be conducive to support their capacity to learn and engage. So it's just such a critical time to be having these conversations as we are seeing an ever changing population of students who have medical and other needs, IEP or no IEP.
That's really good. Thank you for saying that. And you got me thinking about kind of in our community nearby, we have Miracle Park, which is a playground that's based on the principles of universal design. Would anybody like to speak to universal design as a concept? Dr. Highland is
I
excited
think
about that
Jeannie,
one.
I think you were reading my mind because
Jump in.
I was just thinking that, that's the beauty of universal design is you're planning for every student, no matter what. It's not just about ADA access anymore. It's not, you've heard one of the new buzzes that's around, which we've all heard is, really doing a classroom setup for a neurodiverse learner. Well, I will tell you, I think really it's not just about neurodiversity. It's not just about ADA. There are times that, to April's point, we all deal with something. And I will often say, I coined a term a few years ago that I say it's neuro preferences. So, neuro preferences are also something we need to pay attention to. If you're tired, maybe Cindy's been running around with her kiddo and she is just beat and she's, ready to go and take a nap. Well, she's got to work. That's going to maybe cause her to interact with her environment a little different. Maybe Gray hasn't eaten since, 4 o'clock this morning. And so he's got a little bit of that hanger, that happens. And so he's ready to go and grab something to eat. And I'm stressed about something that's going on. All of those things still play into the way we interact with our environment. So that's the beautiful part about universal design is you're thinking ahead. How can this environment adapt and change? If I've got, back on that ADA, if I've got an ADA accessible desk that a student needs in my classroom this year, but I don't have another student who needs one next year, that desk can follow, that can move with that student. In a cafeteria setting, acoustics are hugely, hugely important. It's not making the kids get quieter, it's adapting the environment to help them still socialize and be like that. So what can we move in and out and how can we tweak things? So universal design is by far, I think, one of the best concepts that's come to school design in a lot of years.
I love this conversation. And I think that, I mean, honestly, you know, Gray and I are both in a district that's pretty well resourced, and that's fortunate. But when we talk about access, we want to talk about it for districts too, and not just for kids, right? So and thinking about, I think we're dreaming big, but not every district has the opportunity to build a new school. Some are closing schools, unfortunately. But others are needing to kind of retrofit some of their schools. And so, in balancing kind of finances, with what schools can realistically afford versus, what we would love to see in schools, how could under-resourced districts prioritize changes without maybe major capital projects? That's for anybody to jump in.
I'll start.
Great.
We are very fortunate in Fort Mill. We've passed, I think, 11 out of 12 bond referendums since 1994 or whatever it was. So we've been very, very, very fortunate where we live, and with our taxpayers and our community. But I will say, a lot of our projects, especially in our older schools, have come from grants, have come from relationships with business partners, especially, if a teacher wanted to, I can't tell you how many grants our foundation for Fort Mill Schools gave just for flexible learning for teachers to recreate their classrooms into flexible learning environments. So I think you really have to create those relationships with your business community, with Winthrop University, with organizations like Learn, donors, community partners, universities, whatever it is, to fund those pilot projects. And then I think with the community, and I know in Fort Mill, they want to see the proof. They want to see that these things are working. So I think if you can start with some piloting, some projects like flexible learning environments or whatever it is, I think, and you get the community behind you, I think you have a more realistic shot of getting more money to fund mass classroom overhauls and renovations and those types of things. So I think it really starts with those relationships with the business community. We have a great business community in Fort Mill, and I think a lot of towns do, but I think you really have to build those strong relationships so that you can and apply for those grants. There's a lot of grants out there and we just hired a grant writer for our district this year. So we're just on the, we're learning about grants we didn't even know were out there. So I think it's important to investigate those and research those and try to find every way possible of paying for it without impacting your taxpayers first, and then go from there. So
if I can chime in,
Yep.
Prior to coming back to the Carolinas, I spent a decade in Illinois, and worked with several partner neighborhoods in Chicago. And we still use the same school funding formula from the late 1700s from Horace Mann, local property taxes. And we know the way this nation works. We are largely segregated in how we live by class and race. But one thing that I will say to just shout out the underserved and under-resourced communities, they possess a navigational capital that I have yet to see in your white middle class suburbia. It is a beautiful testament to the ways in which community is such a critical part of the holistic upbringing of families in these underserved communities. So everything that Grace's saying, they are linked in. They are connected to community resources, to businesses. Some of the most under tax funded schools that I enter in, like Charlotte and when I was in Chicago, had some of the most amazing learning materials and resources because of the navigational capital that those communities possess. I think the guidance is needed and the professional development is still needed. But man, those are some resource finding schools and communities,
Yeah.
and we could learn so much from them.
I was going to add just one quick thing. I know I've already talked, sorry.
No,
But
jump in.
I think also it's about the way you think of spaces too. Sometimes, I think I've seen teachers that have gotten no new money, but they've rearranged their classroom. It's the way they arrange the classroom. It's the way they use the hallway outside of their classroom. Teachers have to be willing to let students do that. And I think if they are willing to let students do that, I think you can really transform a classroom without spending really any money, if not a lot of money. So
That's what I was going to ask actually. So if you, if there's a low cost change that you could make in your district, Gray says rearrange some furniture, move things around, right? Anybody else have like this doesn't cost hardly anything, but it's something really simple that you can do that will make an impact in your schools?
I would suggest start as small as you can. Start with some wobble stools, which are inexpensive, or start with a standing table that you don't even need to add seating to. Something, a little tweak here and there that allows a student to try something new and different and allows those teachers. And Gray, I'm with you. I think actually professional development is probably one of the smallest but most impactful changes that you can make. Even getting them to think of that as a tool, no different than a curriculum book or a standard. It's another tool that you have in your toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thrifted a futon couch. It was the first intentional instructional design choice that I made, and it was the best decision ever as a middle school teacher. Because of some of my students who were coming in wanting, like, I wanted to create this is your rest space, a late, not even a calming corner. That's not what this was. There was intentionality behind it. We would often gather in like a small group, just having a little morning circle. And I had 2 bean bags and a thrifted futon couch, and it was such a great community builder for me and my middle school students to gather there every morning and not go right to work, but have small talk conversation and opening restorative community building circle time.
I love that. I was thinking about, I was talking to my daughter this weekend who was telling me she often stands up in class. And I said, your teacher lets you stand up in class? And she said, yeah, if you're in the back row, you're allowed to stand up while you're learning. And it just reminded me that I had pulled research recently on how movement matters, right? Just allowing kids to move once in a while, taking a little bit of a break. And so certainly you have to have a little bit of flexibility in your space to be able to do that. But that's, that's not something that costs anything, but it's something that can make a big difference for children being able to kind of refocus their brain if they can move around a little bit. Good.
The only thing I was going to add, Jeannie, is
Yeah.
just when we say reduce the noise, we also can include reduce the visual noise. And we touched on this earlier. Something that an instructor or a teacher can do to help without adding budget is definitely remove a lot of the things that we have on the wall. Like, I think it's great. I love to walk into a school where their artwork, their papers are displayed. I think that's fantastic, especially to do in the hallways, because there's a moment of pride there that helps build community, that helps build school pride, school brand. But I think in the classroom, the most that, or as much as we can declutter, the better, because it really helps from that distraction from looking around the room and reading something, or, how we've all kind of zoned out from time to time. Letting in the natural light if possible, reducing the amount of bold color in the classroom is also helpful. Thinking about the principles of biophilic design and how bringing nature inside is so important without having to have the latest and greatest in lighting and the right type of acoustical solution or flooring. The more that the inside can feel like the outside, the better outcomes in physical and mental health.
Oh, Cindy, yes. I love this. Well, and I'm thinking about my students who have visual impairments or other sensory impairments. And the fluorescent lighting is not good, but neither is some of the low lighting, the cute
The
little,
LED.
yeah, like that's also not, it's cute, right? But what is the functionality for every child in that classroom? Are you thinking UDL in making sure that it is going to be a supportive measure? So the natural light piece, I cannot, and your neurodivergent students, sensory overload for having too much going on. And there's a lot of that because it's cute and it's a fad, but it lacks that intentional decision making that we've been talking about.
Thank you for saying that. And Cindy, for those who don't know what biophilic design is, I've had a steep learning curve and I know it, but for those who might be watching that don't know, how would you describe that?
I am definitely not an architect and a former designer, but when I think about biophilic design, it's really just the way to bring nature into a space. It's not necessarily bringing in patterns that have leaves or rivers or streams, but it's bringing in elements that make you feel like you're outdoors. The reason we feel relaxed outdoors is because we're breathing fresh air, we're feeling sunlight, we're grounding ourselves into the earth and looking at things that, as you know, a little bit about fractals now, Jeannie, looking at a tree and looking at those branches, the ratio of how that branch gets smaller as it moves its way out is a mathematic design in nature that brings natural stress reduction to our lives. So thinking about the way nature impacts us by looking outdoors, what can we do to bring that indoors without feeling like you have to be so, I just spaced the word, mimicry, maybe where we're having to mimic exact like wood. But like when we're using, say, we're moving away from carpeting a space and we're moving into wanting a hard surface, like maybe we look and consider a wood look there. If you look at what's being done in healthcare started this probably about 10 years ago, where they understood that the healing process, the more biophilic design, that light, that sunlight, that wood tones and the grassy greens, how all of that brings healing to the body. You've noticed in a lot of hospitals now, you're seeing that warm up of those wood tones and that natural light and different elements. And if they can't have natural light, they're using that kind of daylighting to create that natural light. It's the same thing that we can learn and do a lot of in education, in our learning environments.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm at Levine Children's Hospital 2 days a week in Charlotte for a project, and I can attest to what Cindy's saying. The natural light. We even have a wonderful indoor plant vibe going on, just bringing that, all of the positive impacts of plant life into these spaces. It really is about a focus on healing. So I just wanted to say I can attest to that. I'm witnessing it firsthand.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, I had no idea what biophilic design was until just a few weeks ago when we started talking about our 4K center that we're going to open in 2028. And the playground is basically in the middle of these neighborhoods I talked about clusters of classrooms, but the playground is going to be natural. It's going to have trees. It's going to have mud. It's going to have logs that you can step onto and go from log to log, and like a climbing wall that'll be on wood. It's a lot of wood tones like Cindy described. So I was just amazed. It was the first time I had seen it all put together, and it's going to be really neat. And they showed pictures of kids that were all muddy. Well, we want them to get muddy. We want them to play in nature, and we'll have a change of clothes for them if we need to. And we'll have washers and dryers. We'll wash their clothes, So I think it's going to be really neat. And so learning about biophilic design was something I never thought I'd know, but I did learn a few weeks ago, and for a good cause, I guess.
That's pretty awesome. And we do have a couple things on our website that are like little one pagers on biophilic design and fractals and things like that, because you can't know about all of those things, right? But it can make a big difference. How do you, Gray, for you, how do you bring stakeholders along in that sort of thing, and teachers, families, boards, when you're trying to make those changes in your district?
I think, like I said earlier, you get them involved from the get-go, but the ones that aren't involved, I think you constantly update them on what you're doing. Be transparent about why you're doing this. I think that people will get on board, show them the proof, show them the data that supports why you're doing this. And I think, at least in our community, we've had a lot of success with doing that and making sure that we're transparent about what we're doing, why we're doing it. And I think people will get on board.
Awesome. Thank you. And so we are wrapping up here, but if you could give advice to our district leaders, and say, okay, if you're going to do one thing differently next year related to learning spaces, let's just kind of go through the panel. What should that one thing be?
I think, sorry, I keep talking. I
No, jump
apologize.
in. You're ready.
I think for me, it's don't be afraid to take some risk. Give some teachers the flexibility to do some things that they think might work and see what it does. I mean, you can always go back and change things if it's not working. But I think our teachers are on the front lines. They're working with the kids every day. They know how they need to learn. And I think you find those teachers that are really passionate about making a change and taking a risk to help our students. I think as a principal or as a superintendent, I think or district office leader, I think you have to give them that leeway to take those risks and support them along the way with the professional development, with if you have funds that you can support them with. And usually, if it works, other teachers are going to jump on board and they're going to want to do the same thing. So I think it's just first giving those teachers that freedom to change if they want to.
I love that. Thank you.
Well, I'll piggyback, Gray, on what you just said. And I love that you, in a nutshell, said trust your teachers and let them do what they do best. And I would just piggyback on that and say, let them be learners. You know, get rid of the old style sit and get, and I've got the 2-page agenda of a meeting that I need to go through, and allow them to experience learning in that type of space. Because if you think about it, most every teacher that we have in our schools today has never learned in an environment like we're talking about.
Yep.
So it's scary. Change is scary, but let them be learners. Let them bring a little bit of what, even a little touch of what Gray was saying about that preschool. Bring that play and that environment of nurturing and support to our teachers. Let them be the learners and let us say, okay, now get into groups of 2 or go stand and sit where you need to sit to do your best learning. And when they experience it and they feel the comfort and go, wow, okay, this is cool, then they're going to be able to pass that along to our kids.
It's awesome.
I'm going to jump to Dr. Mustian and then come back to Cindy on this one because it's such a good tie-in with what Dr. Hyland just said. As somebody who trains teachers, right? How would it open things up for you if you had a space on your campus or in your building where teachers could kind of experience learning that way, like Sue Ann was mentioning?
Think it's critical. In fact, it's something that I'm hoping can happen on our campus and in our education building. But it's also why, the initiative that I have at my local children's hospital is really broadening really the opportunities that our teacher candidates are having. We just held a fun STEM learning activity on Friday in the lobby of Levine Children's Hospital, which is already set up with so much physical furniture that is flexible that they were able to see how easily we could adapt for the little boy who came in the wheelchair and the little girl whose grandparents had her in the little Red Ryder wagon, and the Ty who had his occupational therapist who was actually helping him hold him up to be steady as he walked. We had the ability to make all of that space flexible to every child, every patient who came in, and they were able to access the learning opportunities. And that is just something that I think is so critical at the teacher prep level. I love that they're coming to the children's hospital and getting this opportunity, but also we should be serving as a model for what intentional learning design looks like. And so we can bring in-service teachers to campus, and we can also make sure that at the pre-service level, they are gaining that critical opportunity because it's such an important step that when they get to a district and they have an amazing superintendent like Gray Young, who empowers his principals to empower the teachers to take risks, they are taking risks with foundational understanding of intentional design.
I love that. Thank you. Good. Any final words, Cindy?
I don't think I could sum it up better than those three, but the only thing I would add is to Gray Young's point, listen to your teachers and empower the teachers. I think that's huge. That's step one. I've traveled and been with a lot of supers and with a lot of teachers that don't feel that necessarily. They don't have that position to be able to try something different or bring forth the research. So to Dr. Hyland's point, listen, don't be afraid to listen. Let them be in the space. Let them listen to what's needed. And to Dr. Mustaine's point, test it out. Don't be afraid to test. The only thing I would add to that as a final thought is don't be afraid to ask the students too. Do you feel that having all of this on the wall in this space is too much? Let's try a week where we don't have it, and let's try a week where we put it back up. What do you respond best to? Those type of exercises cost no one additional money. And I think we can learn a lot, especially, in industry and in research and administration, by pulling the ones that we want to make the change for.
Well, listen, we are out of time, but we here at Learn are so grateful for our industry experts, our university partners, our district leader partners. You guys are very generous in giving your time today and often for us, and we do really appreciate it. It makes all the difference in helping to kind of advance the understanding of some of your peers. And so thank you for that. I wanted to let you know that Learn webinars are posted on our website and are accessible on demand. And that's out of respect for the busy schedules of district leaders that we serve. And so if you're looking for this one, it'll be up next week and will remain on the site for at least a year if you look under resources. So our website is www.golearntoday.org. And then under the tab resources, you'll find this webinar and the other ones that we have. And just for anybody watching to stay looped in as new webinars or research emerges, just sign up for our newsletter under the Engage tab. Thank you for joining us today, guys.